Latest updates in the American Airlines 5342 Washington, D.C. midair collision. Does this change the national airspace? Let's find out in this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken. It's Tuesday, February 4th. New updates have been released and discovered over the weekend in the American Airlines 5342, a CRJ regional jet, and a Blackhawk helicopter midair collision. Also, in this video, reported a few days ago was a near collision the day before the accident in a similar situation. We'll dive into that one in detail. The NTSB has released drone footage of the accident scene, and authorities have identified the pilot of the Blackhawk. And before we get to new information, a very quick recap. American Airlines Flight 5342, operated by PSA Airlines on behalf of American, flying from Wichita, Kansas to Washington Reagan International in Washington, D.C., collided with a US Army UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter PAT-25, which was a priority air transport helicopter operated by the 12th Aviation Battalion out of Felt Belvoir, Virginia. On board the CRJ 700ER were 64 passengers and crew, and on board the UH-60 Blackhawk were 3 crew members, pilot, instructor pilot, and crew chief. Now, here's a rundown on the latest news, and then we'll get into some of the details. 3 black boxes in total containing cockpit voice and flight data for the CRJ and the Blackhawk have been recovered. Those are already being analyzed in the lab in D.C. In fact, the NTSB had a press conference on Saturday, the 1st of February, and released some of the CRV information from the CRJ. Again, we'll dive deeper into that shortly. Victims are being identified with 55 of the 67 at the time of this video, including the flight crew, which includes the first officer who was engaged to be married, 14 skaters of the figure skating community, including young athletes and coaches, some of them Russian, returning from the U.S. National Championships. The NTSB has announced the preliminary report is expected in 30 days. American Airlines has announced flight number 5342 will be retired, which is common practice in the airline industry. The FAA, on the day after the crash, started restricting the helicopter routes around DCA indefinitely. Runway 33, where 5342 was cleared to land, will be closed for about another week at least. And we'll talk about the runways and the DC airport in a moment. Okay, let's now go through what we know as of February 4th, 2025 by going through this accident in chronological order, discussing the updates in detail as they play out. All right, let's start 8:44 p.m. local time. Flight 5342 was asked to change their approach to runway 33, a common occurrence at DCA for the smaller regional aircraft. And to understand DCA, Washington Reagan Airport was built in a day and age of DC-3 transport, small planes, in 1941. Planes were a lot smaller, and with the city around it, there's not really any lengthening of runways that can be done. Runways are always counted as 2, 1 for each direction. So there are 6 runways at DC, so 3 main stretches of pavement asphalt. The longest is runway 0119 at 7,168 feet. The runway that Flight 5342 was about to land on is only 5,204 feet, which generally can only take the smaller regional jets. A 737, unless winds and conditions were just right, generally would not be able to accept that runway. For comparison, DFW's runways are almost twice the length of Reagan's longest, coming in at 13,400 feet. This is why you'll never see Air Force One, a 747, landing Reagan International. The airport is tiny. Anyway, Flight 5342 accepted the change from the longer, but still short, runway 01 to runway 33 and was instructed by ATC.
5342, that's Wilson Bridge, change to turn for runway 33, clear to land.
Change to runway 33 for land, 5342.
Audio and visuals are from Vass Aviation. Victor there does a lot of work. Please check out his channel and subscribe and support him. At 8:46 p.m. local time, PAT-25, who was north of the airport flying along the Potomac, was asked,
PAT-25, traffic just off the Wilson Bridge to CRJ at 1,200 feet, starting runway 33.
Pat has a traffic site request visual separation.
This separation approved.
Here is where the breakdown began. As we often say, most accidents don't have a single point of failure, but rather a line of small failures that lead to the accident, or as we call it, a chain, where if you can break a link in the chain, the accident can be avoided. This accident is no different. PAT-25 acknowledged the traffic advisory and stated they had the traffic in sight and requested to be able to maintain visual separation. Real quick, let's get the details on the Blackhawk crew. Chief Pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Eves had over 1,000 hours flying the Blackhawk. It's his voice on the radio, which most likely means the other pilot was the one flying. And she was Captain Rebecca Lobach with 500 hours of flying. Her identity was just released this weekend. In the meantime, I can't find any of her social media to get a better perspective on who she was at this time. The Army released a statement saying she was a servant, a caregiver, and an advocate. She served as a certified sexual harassment, assault response and prevention, SHARP, victim advocate, and served as a White House military social aide for the Biden administration. A social aide for the military is someone who is tasked that dignitaries, heads of states, and high-profile guests are greeted, escorted, and treated according to protocol. The third person on the Blackhawk was Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hare, who served as the crew chief. Then there's a second call out from ATC to PAT-25, which is acknowledged moments before the collision.
PAT-25, get CRJ in sight. PAT-25, pass behind this CRJ.
Pat has a aircraft in sight request visual separation.
This separation.
The two aircraft collided. What about the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, on the CRJ regional jet being piloted by Captain Jonathan Campos and First Officer Sam Lilly? Well, the NTSB gave a press conference on February 1st, and Bryce Banning of the NTSB gave us a play-by-play on the CVR from the flight deck of the CRJ.
At 8:43:06, the crew made initial contact with the DCA tower. The tower controller then asked if the crew could switch to runway 33. After a brief discussion between the crew, they agreed to runway 33. At 8:45:27, the autopilot was disconnected. At 8:46:01, a radio transmission from the tower was audible, informing PAT-25 that traffic just south of the Wilson Bridge was a CRJ at 1,200 feet circling to runway 33. At 8:46:29, the crew received a 1,000-foot automated call-out. At 8:46:47, DCA tower cleared other jet traffic on runway 1 for departure with no delay. At 8:47:29, the crew received a 500-foot automated call-out. At 8:47:39, a radio transmission from the tower was audible asking PAT-25 if the CRJ was in sight. 1 second later, the crew received an automated traffic advisory stating traffic. At 8:47:42, a radio transmission from the tower was audible directing PAT-25 to pass behind the CRJ. At 8:47:58, the crew had a verbal reaction, and FDR data showed the airplane beginning to increase its pitch. Sounds of impact were audible about 1 second later, followed by the end of the recording.
As far as altitudes, the Blackhawk helicopter was on a helicopter route, and it had a maximum of 200 feet of altitude at that point because of the approaches into DCA. And here's what the NTSB had to say about that, and he prefaced by letting us know that his team was split on whether to release this information, particularly about the screen in the control tower.
The CRJ, based upon the data recorder, at the time of impact was at 325 feet, plus or minus 25 feet. Our preliminary review of what the tower cab was showing on the data screen that would have been in front of the controllers was 200 feet near the time of the accident.
What he is saying is that the radar screen in the tower might have displayed the helicopter as being at 200 feet to the controller. But regardless, the CRJ was at 325 feet, plus or minus 25 feet, and they collided, which puts the helicopter at 325 feet. And since the accident, the FAA has halted helicopter flights around DCA, specifically the route the Sikorsky H-60 took on the night of the accident. An investigation, of course, is ongoing by the NTSB, the FAA, and other federal agencies. Investigators will be looking into the air traffic control, the cockpit voice recorders, flight data recorders of both aircraft, which they've all been recovered, as I mentioned, to help determine the ultimate cause of the accident to prevent them in the future. The NTSB has released drone footage of the accident site in the Potomac. Just 24 hours earlier, PAT-11 nearly collided with Southwest 3565 and RPA 4514 just a couple of miles up the river. On January 29th at 7:56 p.m. local time in D.C., PAT-11 was advised of a Southwest aircraft that was descending from 3,500 feet on the river visual for runway 1. The air traffic controller pointed out an aircraft that was actually coming in from the north on the river visual for runway 19, the opposite direction of what ATC said. Here's the video from VAS Aviation. Again, support him, please. He does a lot of good work.
And PAT-11, traffic's going to be approaching Cabin John, continuing down the river. It's going to be a Southwest 3,500 descending, landing runway 1.
Request visual separation, PAT-11.
At 7:56 and 57 seconds, PAT-11 requested the visual separation. Air traffic control did not reply to the request. PAT-11 continued northeast while Southwest 3565 continued on its river visual approach to runway 19. At 7:58 and 30 seconds, Southwest 3565 contacted the tower and advised they were on the RNP Zulu approach for runway 19, not the river visual.
Southwest 3565 is on the RMP Zulu 19.
Southwest 3565, Washington Tower, runway 19 clear to land. Traffic will depart. Continue to reduce the final approach speed. Additional traffic is going to be a helicopter over Memorial Bridge, DFR northwest down 200 feet. They have you on site. Maintain a visual separation as they continue up the river.
And Southwest 3565 copies all.
At 7:59, 45 seconds, DCA Tower requested
That's tomorrow.
PAT-11, watch out, roger. Maintain visual separation, southwest off your nose.
Maintain, PAT-11.
At 8 p.m., the conflict alert indicated on Southwest Airlines 3565's track and PAT-11's track on the radar scope in the control tower, as their vertical separation was less than 1,000 feet. Right as the two aircraft passed over each other's separation was less than 500 feet. Another aircraft, an Embraer E-175 with Republic Airlines RPA 4514, was flying behind the Southwest aircraft on the approach to runway 19. At 8 o'clock and 33 seconds, RPA 4514 was given a traffic advisory stating the helicopter was traveling northbound at 300 feet.
4514, watch out. Reduce the final approach speed. Runway 19 clear to land. Traffic will depart. Additional traffic is a helicopter over Georgetown, northbound 300 feet.
Alright, slowing it down. Upon approach, we 19, clear to land, pick out 4514, left for driver.
Roger, Pat 1 traffic, 2 miles north of your position, Embraer 1900, descending, landing 119.
Being quick to Pat 11.
Traffic inside, pick out 4514.
Pat 11 began to climb from 300 feet, eventually reaching 700 feet. While this was occurring, a controller switch happened. And this is where a controller switches with another controller, giving a handoff and giving them control of the airspace, usually as a part of a shift change, but also sometimes as brakes. Being an air traffic controller is a very high-stress job, and controllers often need small brakes to allow them to focus, so they're rotated in quite a bit.
Tower, Vic here, 4495 is River Visual 19. Tower, Vic here, 4495, River Visual 19.
Rio 4495, Washington Tower, runway 19, clear to land, traffic departs, flight arrival.
At 8 o'clock, 1 minute 27 seconds, the helicopter and RPA 4514 had less than 500 feet of separation. The crew of RPA 4514, having received a TCAS, or Traffic Collision Avoidance System alert, initiated a go-around and climbed.
Hey, Tower, we had a RA, pick out 4514 is going around.
Roger, Big Air 4514, so would you like to go around? Appears to be going around, so go around. Turn right heading 250, climb maintain 3000.
250, climb maintain 3000, pick out 4514.
When pilots get a resolution alert, or RA, they can deviate from ATC instructions and follow the RA's call out. It'll say climb, climb, or descend, descend. The crew contacted the tower at 8 o'clock, 1 minute 47 seconds, and advised that they had an RA and were going around. And that's the rundown of the close call the day before the horrible midair. This midair collision accident is tragic. The families, friends, and loved ones of the passengers and the crew aboard AA 5342 and PAT-25 are in our prayers. When I look at these accidents, I always try to think about what I can learn from them and what can I do as a fixed wing and rotor wing pilot to make my flights safer. The biggest takeaway from this is to keep your head outside the aircraft, to fly precise. If given an altitude, don't let it drift by a couple hundred feet. In shooting, the saying is aim small, miss small. I can apply that to my flying in both fixed wing and helicopters. And I've noticed as I do this, it transfers to other areas of my life. And that's our update on the tragic midair in Washington, D.C. We'll be back with more updates as they happen. In the meantime, if you want to see our video on the Learjet crash in Philadelphia, check it out here, and we'll have updates on that when they happen as well. Please stay safe out there, and remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. Take care.